Well, hello everyone, and welcome to church today, wherever you are watching from. My name is Craig, if I haven't met you before, and we are in the middle of a series called Summer Stories, and these are some of the stories that Jesus told, or the parables that Jesus told, and we're looking at some of the famous ones. And last week we heard from Boris, who was talking to us about love and forgiveness through the story of the Good Samaritan, a very famous story. But he shared it with us in such a fresh and encouraging way. So if you haven't watched it, or if you want to hear from Boris, check out our YouTube channel and you can see his sermon from last week. But today we're looking at an equally famous story, and it might be a story that you've heard 100 times or maybe just the first time, but I've been praying and trusting that God will speak to you today really clearly, whether it's the first or the 100th time that you've heard this story. And the story we are going to hear from today is the story of the parable of the prodigal son. And that's from Luke chapter 15. So should we jump into it and we can read that together. So Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 1. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Let's jump through to verse 11. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. There he wasted his money in wild living. About this time his money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son.' But his father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe into the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his fingers and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate a feast, for the son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found.' And so the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. 'Your brother is back,' he was told, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return.' The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, 'All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf.' His father said to him, 'Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found.'" I want to start off my time with you today by putting out a controversial thought, in that I think the title of this passage is wrong, or could be retitled. I think this parable should be called the parable of the prodigal God. And the reason why I say that is that if you look at the word prodigal, it means that someone has a lot of, or gives away freely of their resources on a really lavish scale. And I would probably even go so far as to say that the prodigal son, the younger son, is actually the third most important character in the story. Well, why do I say that? Well, if you look at the context of the story, in verse 1 and 2, Jesus wasn't actually talking to the younger son. He was talking to the Pharisees, which links to the older brother. The Pharisees, they were just mumbling and grumbling about the types of people that Jesus was hanging out with, those notorious sinners, and Jesus is actually responding to them. So actually we could even give this story a subtitle, say this is the parable of the prodigal God, a story of two lost sons. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a look at this story through these three main characters in the story. And we're going to start in my controversial order, starting with the third most important one, and that's the younger brother. So the passage starts with the younger brother asking for his father's inheritance up front. And the way that it worked in those days was that he would have probably got about a third of his father's inheritance. Because culturally, the oldest son would always get a double portion of any of the other siblings. So that meant that he would get a double portion, and the youngest son would get a third, if you follow my maths. But the shocking implication for those people listening was that what the youngest son was ultimately implying was that he wished that his father was dead. In other words, he valued his father's stuff way more than his relationship with his father. Now, I want you to remember this phrase as we get on to talking about the father a little bit later on. But what this younger brother did, this was the most culturally taboo move that he could do, the most disrespectful, shove it in your face kind of thing that you could have done to your father. But this younger son, he doesn't seem to care. He just carries on going, living his best life, only to discover after a while that this lifestyle is a bit empty and he's left with nothing. So much so that he reaches a point, probably the lowest point that a Jewish person can go, and that he was hanging out in a pigsty. He was hanging out with pigs. In fact, pigs were considered the most unclean animals for Jewish people, and hence that's even today they don't even eat pork. But this son, he was at such a low point in his life that he was even considering eating the food that the pigs were eating. It was at this low point that he realized that he needed some saving. He needed a rescuer. He couldn't do it himself. All his money had dried up. His reputation and his social standing had gone because he's got no money left. All of his friends that he had, those were all gone, and no one was willing to help him. He had no home. He had no food, no clothes, no money, nothing. So what does he do? Where does he go? Well, he comes up with this plan, and he says to himself, well, maybe the only place that I can go where I have the smallest possible chance of getting a job, well, that's maybe at my father's estate. Well, not only this, but he thought he's going to be a hired hand, and he's going to start to try and earn some money to repay back his father the money that he owed, or that he borrowed from his father, and he's going to do that as a laborer. But as he walks down the road back to his father's house, he sees his father come running down the road. Now, the running part is actually quite important because in Middle Eastern culture, men didn't run because they had these long flowing robes that made it pretty difficult to run. B, it was a really undignified action for the male patriarch in the house to actually run. But this father doesn't care. He runs down the road, he sees his son, and he embraces him in a massive bear hug. The son in that moment sort of tries to to explain his business plan of how he's going to repay the father back. But the father, interrupts and says, no, I've got my own plans, party plans to celebrate that you have returned. Now, I know I have similar moments to this where I feel like I've messed up and feel like I'm too dirty to try and approach God. I've messed up so far. And I try and come up with ways to justify it. And I think maybe if I give some money to the poor, I'll feel a little bit better. Or maybe if I listen to a Christian podcast instead of watching Netflix, and then maybe these kind of things will appease my guilt. Similarly, you might be feeling like the younger brother in that you are feeling completely down and out. I don't know whether COVID has bashed you left, right, and center. Maybe your finances are completely depleted. Maybe you've got no job and you've been desperately searching for months and months and you haven't found anything. Maybe you've been living a life of pleasure and you realize the emptiness that it brings you. You could well be in a really desperate state and you're aware of how much saving you need. Well, can I encourage you to keep listening as we get to the main character of the father and hear how he responds to the younger son, and equally how he's going to respond to you and where you are in your life at the moment. So we get to Act 2 in the story, and often this is where people stop reading because they think the story is about the prodigal son who ran away. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the prodigal son is the third most important character. So we get onto the second most important character and introduce the grumpy older brother. So his indignant claim of being treated unfairly seems understandably on superficial level, but let's get into some of the underlying details given to us in this passage so we can understand where the older brother is. So have a look at verse 27. It speaks about the fattened calf. Now, what does this imply? Well, just like land in those times, livestock or the fattened calf was a source of major income and wealth for people. And so eating meat was actually a pretty rare and a really expensive thing to do, which is normally reserved for special events like weddings and those kind of things. Because essentially eating the fattened calf meant eating into a huge amount of potential profit. So if you remember correctly, the remaining 2/3 of the father's estate essentially belonged to the oldest son. So the oldest son the older brother is thinking at this point, he's saying, hey, that's my money that you are eating. That's my wealth that you are taking. You already had yours. That's not fair. That's mine. So the same thing. His actions are actually no different to his younger brother. Can you see the parallel between the Pharisees and the older brother too? They consider themselves to be so high and mighty and so above it that they wouldn't even associate with their own people that were living in the same place as them. The older brother, he couldn't even bring himself to say, my brother. He speaks to the father contentiously, saying, this son of yours. Maybe you don't feel like the younger brother in the story. Maybe you associate more with the feelings of the older brother. Maybe your life has been pretty good and you feel like you've done everything right, but nothing seems to be going your way. Everyone else seems to be getting all the blessings and all the good stuff. You've been struggling day and night and you've been working so hard for your wages, and yet you get nothing. You feel like you get nothing. Nothing goes your way. David in the Psalms felt similarly. He said to himself, hey, how come everyone else seems to be prospering while I don't? God, I thought you loved me. I've done everything right by the books. Well, again, keep listening to how the father responds to the older son as we get to the story about the father for those people, those of us who feel like that. Maybe if you're a modern day version of the older brother, you might be saying to yourself, well, I do all these things right. I read my Bible and I pray every day. I give away 10% of everything that I earn. I go to church, or I watch church, and I attend city group every week. I even have a Hoot If You Love Jesus bumper sticker on my car. So, these are all good things, don't get me wrong. And they are all important things, but these are not the things that save you. These are not the things that, this is not how you earn your salvation. These are ways that you work out your salvation. I know this is me, and I regularly have to do a pride check on myself and assess how I'm approaching my relationship with God and how I'm approaching my life, and just to see whether I'm trying to good works my way into God's good books. Well, credit to Jesus, the movie script writer and storyteller extraordinaire. He leaves us on a cliffhanger, wondering what's going to happen. Does the older brother go back to the party and celebrate? What happens? Does the dad, is he able to convince him to come and attend? Well, I think the omission here is deliberate on Jesus' part. What is he trying to say to us? Well, I think he is telling us the story of the younger son and the older son. And in his context, it was the notorious sinners and the Pharisees, and you and I here today. I think he's leaving it out because he's pointing us to the Father. So let's have a look at the Father, the main character in the story, the prodigal God. So firstly, what was the father's response to the youngest son? Well, this youngest son's request was completely opposite to what was the father's response was completely unexpected to what was happened. Culturally, a father was expected to respond with physicality and violence, as to say, like, that is the most stupid request you could ever ask. Get away from me. I'm not going to give it to you. But that's not what that father does. Moreover, the son is asking for his estate. So the father would have actually had to go and sell 1/3 of his estate to get the cash that he needs. In those days, before there was a sort of a feasible cash and banking system, wealth, as I mentioned earlier, was determined by land ownership. So this father was actually willing to sell 1/3 of his land. And along with whatever the social standing that came with land ownership in those days, he was willing to give that up for his younger son. That's incredible. Maybe if we put into our context today as Sydney-siders, that might be the same as you going to your parents now and saying, hey mum, hey dad, can I have 33% of all your super savings because I really wanted to go to Europe on that ski trip? Like a lifetime of savings and hard work on your parents' part just for a few moments of pleasure on your part. It seems a bit crazy. Well, this father's act was enormously generous, because not only was he giving away a huge amount of his money, but essentially he was enduring one of the hardest things that humans can endure, and that was rejected love. And that his sons were wanting to exchange his stuff. They wanted his stuff rather than him as a person. And I know that I'm guilty of this too, and that I value the stuff that God gives me more than my relationship with God himself. So we know that this father in the story represents God, our Heavenly Father, and he responds to the sinful son with just such warmth and with such love and such forgiveness. If you're feeling like the youngest son today, and you know that you're a bit lost in your life, and you're acutely aware of how messed up you are and how all the wrong things that you've done, well, can I encourage you to just come to the Father? He's waiting with open arms to welcome you back into his family as a son and a daughter. All the things that you've done wrong, no matter how bad you think they are or how messed up you think they are, he will forgive you, and he'll welcome you back into the family, and he'll celebrate with a party on your return. As I mentioned earlier, the subtitle of this story could be the parable of the two lost sons, because both sons are actually lost. We can all, I suppose, understand where the youngest son went wrong and the bad things that he's done, and understand why he is lost. But the older son is equally as lost. He thinks he can maintain his relationship with the father by doing good things. He's almost lost in his goodness. In fact, it's his pride that's keeping him from really experiencing true relationship with the Father. Both sons ultimately are using the Father for their own gain. But how does the Father respond? Well, if you have a look at both stories, the Father in both occasions goes out to meet the sons. The Father is flipping traditional humanly fatherhood on its head. We might think of a father as someone who's like a rule enforcer, or sometimes a bit harsh or judgmental, maybe even a bit physically and emotionally distant, sometimes even a bit unapproachable. But this is not this father. Look at how he responds. He's the initiator. He's warm, and he hugs you. He forgives you, and he loves you for who you are. The Heavenly Father, he reaches out to each one of us by sending his son Jesus to pay the price to save us. I want to finish by sharing an illustration with you with which you can hopefully relate to, given that we just had Christmas. So just imagine that you're a parent, and you've got a child, and you save up as much money as you can, and you buy your child the best present that you can afford, and you wrap it up nicely, and you put it under the Christmas tree. And come Christmas morning, your child comes running down the stairs to see if there are any presents under the tree. So if your child was the younger brother, he would see the present, and he would go, "Oh, Dad, I'm really sorry. I just can't open this present. I've been really bad this year. I've done so many naughty things. I just don't deserve. I don't deserve this gift. Well, can you tell me how much it costs? Because then I'll go and get a job, and I'll try and earn some money, and then I can pay you for the present." I mean, that sounds a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? What if your child was the older brother? He would come running down the stairs, and he would look at the present, and he would say, "Is that it? Is that all I'm getting? After everything I've done for you this year, after everything I've done this year, I've behaved impeccably. I've done everything right. I haven't done anything wrong. That present's just not good enough for me. I don't want it." I mean, that sounds even more ridiculous. Let's just go back to the reason as to why you are receiving a gift in the first place. The reason you're receiving a gift is because you are a child of a loving parent. Full stop. There's nothing that you've done. And this is the crux of and the pinnacle of my message to you today, is that there is absolutely nothing that you can do, good or bad, to save yourself. There is no sin or bad behavior that can separate you from God's love. Equally, there's no list of achievements or good things that you can do that can earn your saving. And this is the gospel in a nutshell. And your value and your worth as a gift receiver is based only on your identity as a member of the family, as a son or a daughter. And nothing that you have ever done, or nothing that you will ever do, or any good stuff that you have done will ever qualify you or disqualify you from being in a relationship with this loving Father who gave it all up for you. All you need to do today is to accept this gift from the Father. Will you accept the gift today? No T's and C's apply. May I also encourage you that if you have heard the story before, not to sort of get too used to it or think that, or that you just miss the heart of the gospel. Yes, if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian today, you might want to respond to this message for the first time today. But if you have heard the message before, I want to encourage you to keep thinking about it. The gospel is both a moment as well as a journey. A moment in that you might have heard it for the first time and you respond, but also a journey in that you can remind yourself daily of the length that the Father went to on your behalf, the significance of the gift that he gave you so that you can be a member or part of this family. I want to give you a chance to respond today. So can we pray as we finish? I just want to pray for those of you who would like to respond to this message for the first time. Maybe you wouldn't call yourself a Christian today and you realize you're in a really bad place. Maybe you want to pray with me today and you want to say something like, God, I'm really sorry for the things that I've done wrong. I'm really sorry for all the mess-ups in the life that I've been living. I'm aware that I can't save myself. And today I want to give that all up and I want to say I'm sorry and I want to come and be hugged and embraced by you, the loving Father. Jesus, won't you come into my life and be at the center of my life? I want to be called a son and daughter and I want to do that today. Come into my life today, Jesus. If you perhaps would associate with the older brother or the older son and you would call yourself a Christ follower and you have responded to the gospel previously and you just want to be refreshed by that, can I pray for you today as well? God, we thank you for this message. We thank you for the reminder of what you've done for us. We thank you for the length and the extent that you went to save us, the cost that you paid for us, that we can be a member of your family, that you gave up your son as a price for us so that we can be in your family. We thank you for the magnitude of that. Won't you just continue to remind us of who you are as a loving Father, that you want us in your family, that you love having us as part of your family. And we just pray today that we will continue to grasp how great your love is, that we'll continue to have more and more understanding of who you are as the Father, the main character in the story, and that you will continue to be with us as we head into this year. We don't know what's happening and people are a bit uncertain about what 2021 holds, but we do know who holds 2021, and that's you, God the Father. You are a loving Father. You have great things in store for your family. You've got great gifts for us, and we want to trust you for what this year holds. So be with us, God, as we head into this year, and thank you for what you've done for us. Amen.
Hey church family, well I just want to bring you a quick word of encouragement. We've been reading through and studying the book of Joshua in preparation for a preach series which we feel he's put on our heart as he's been prophetically speaking to us through this book over the last little while. And I just want to bring you a brief encouragement from one of my favorite passages in that book. Now a little bit of context for you about what's happened up until this point. Now Moses had been leading the people of God. He led them out of captivity in Egypt toward the promised land, but they've been wandering around the desert for some 40 years. And at some point, Moses sends this delegation of spies on like a reconnaissance mission into the promised land to kind of scout out what was there. Now 10 of those spies come back with really negative, fear-filled, pessimistic reports of what lies ahead. But two men, come back with faith-filled reports of what is in the land. And those two men are Joshua, who ends up leading Israel, the people of God, and Caleb. And God promises through Moses at the time, he promises Caleb a share in the inheritance of that land because he's come back with such a faith-filled report of what lay there. Now, if we fast forward 45 years into Joshua 14, the people of God have moved into that promised land. Joshua is now leading the people. He's divided up the land and is beginning to allot it to the different tribes of Israel. And it's at this point that Caleb speaks up, and he says this in Joshua 14:10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today. I'm 85 years old. I'm still just as strong today as the day that Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out into battle now as I was then. Now, give me this hill country that the Lord promised me on that day. It's like he's saying, look, I know that a lot of time has passed, and I know that there's still some battles to fight. Actually, the Amalekites who inhabited that hill country were the giants that those 10 spies had come back so fearful of. So he's saying, I know that a lot of time has passed. I know there's still some battles to fight, but I'm ready to speak up, to rise up, to claim the inheritance that God set aside for me. Now, I'm not like a name it and claim it kind of guy, really, but I do believe that God puts dreams and desires and hopes and aspirations in our hearts because he wants to see those things fulfilled and realized in our lives. And so perhaps there is a hope, a dream, an aspiration, a desire, maybe an area of gifting, maybe a particular ministry. Perhaps there's a creative business idea or even a charitable initiative that God has put in your heart. And maybe a lot of time has passed since he put that thing there. And maybe the road ahead still looks like there'll be lots of battles on it. But I feel the word of encouragement for you today is, what is it that you need right now to rise up, to speak up, and to claim as your inheritance? What is it that God's like rekindling in you? What is it that he's reminding you of at this point that he put in there? What do you need to, in a sense, remind God of? Not that he's forgotten about it, but say, hey, God, you gave me this thing. And maybe today is the day for me to rise up and to claim that which you have set aside for me. Is there a Joshua that you need to speak to encourage you in that journey? Is there somebody who you need to say, hey, I'm just as strong today as I was back then. I'm just as vigorous now as what I was back then to go into the battle. I'm ready to take the land which God has laid aside for me. I'm ready to take on some giants. I hope that's encouragement to you guys. Love you heaps. Cheers.